Hi, I'm Keith St. John. I'm one of the candidates to replace the retiring Nikki Songus in the Massachusetts 3rd Congressional District. I was born in Worcester in 1985 and lived in Hudson until '96 before I was moved to the rural community of Bethlehem, New Hampshire, where I spent my high school and collegiate years until returning back to Massachusetts to finalize my bachelor's degree and continue on and get my master's degree at Bentley University in Waltham. I'm running on a platform that I think is slightly different than some of the other people that I'm running against. I know for infrastructure, everybody would like to see roads, bridges, and dams replaced, and some people like to talk about high-speed rail and how we can properly affect that. I think where I differ a little bit is I'd like to see all of our electrical grid buried to protect it from storms and other such activities which could knock it out and greatly harm our economy. I also think that the federal government should take the lead in replacing all the lead service lines in the country so that we can prevent another Flint from happening in the future. I'd like to look at how we do education in this country. Right now, our educational system, I feel, is underserving the high school population, and we need to refocus some more on vocational programs so that the people who are going to be plumbers or electricians or solar panel engineers or putting in wind turbines and other such things have training beginning in high school so they can find out what they want to do, so that we prevent some of these cases where people who I went to school with, who went to school for 1 or 2 years and left college but still had massive student loans. I think the student loans need to be able to be renegotiated so that when interest rates drop, your student loan rate will drop as well. I think one of the main reasons why I've gotten into politics, something that I never thought I was going to do in the past, is Congress has abdicated way too much of its responsibility to the executive branch. I think the Congress needs to take more of the responsibility back. I think that we need to take more of a lead on how the country is run, where the country is going. I think more issues need to be debated and not fewer issues. The whole point of Congress is to have the hard debate about the hard questions that are going to impact the rest of our lives. I think one of the things that we need to do is use the active military less and take care of our veterans better. We all know somebody who spent a long time in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we owe it to them. They put their life and their livelihoods and their physical safety on the line for us, and we need to take care of them when they come back. I'm Keith St. John, and this is my message.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this week's edition of the Sun Editorial Board meetings with candidates for the 3rd Congressional District. With us today is Keith St. John. Keith, thank you for coming in today.
Pleasure.
Keith, you are from Hudson.
Originally Hudson, yeah. I was born in Worcester in 1985.
Okay.
And lived in Hudson until '96. I live in Marlboro now.
Marlboro, okay. And you are an entrepreneur?
Yes.
So thank you for coming in today. We're anxious to hear how you stand on some of the issues. We'll give you about a minute to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and why you're running, and then myself with a couple of Sun colleagues will ask you a bunch of questions that we've been trying to be consistent with all the candidates, asking them the same questions. So without further ado, welcome to the Sun and take it away.
I'm Keith St. John. I've lived in New England all of my life to this point, and hopefully will continue to do so. I was born in 1985 in the middle of Reagan's America in Worcester. Lived in Hudson until 1996, where I was forcibly extricated to northern New Hampshire when my father was relocated jobs. But it actually turned out to be a really great experience living in a rural area. There was less pollution. You playground were the mountains and the rivers and the streams, and you got out and you got to know each other really well. But then afterwards, I was drawn back to the city for education and economic activity. I love northern New Hampshire, but there's not much going on up there.
Where were you in northern New Hampshire?
Bethlehem, just north of Franconia Notch. So if you know where the Old Man of the Mountain was, it was like 2 towns away. I skied at Cannon all winter. I got involved in politics recently. I never thought I was going to. I was an entrepreneur, I was having fun with it, enjoyed traveling whenever I got the chance, and then the last 2 years have happened. I don't like the tone and tenor of national politics right now. I think Congress is abdicating way too much of its constitutional authority to the executive branch, and I'd like to see that turned back around. I'd like to see money, especially dark money and PAC money, taken out of politics. I'd really like to see infrastructure improvements and dams, roads, bridges, obviously, but I think two of the main things that we have to do outside of that is replace all the lead service lines in the country. Flint's gotten a lot of attention on it, but in the last year I received a notice from Marlboro DPW saying there was a lead water scare in Marlboro. So, a fairly wealthy suburb in a fairly wealthy state still having lead problems. So I think the federal needs to take the lead on replacing lead service lines. especially with all the storms that we've just gotten, late season storms, which with climate change are likely to get more prevalent and bigger. I think we should bury the electrical lines. And I live in a neighborhood that has buried electrical lines. If the power goes out, we know it's someplace else. And how much economic activity is lost if you lose power to 1 million people? And if the power goes out in Boston, that's a huge economic driver for not just the region, but the country, and lose 1 or 2 days of business, and that's a lot. So I think if we bury the electric lines, make it less likely for trees to fall on them, less likely for the wind to knock them down to begin with, and suffer less power outages, it'll be good for the long term. One of the things that I'd really like to see a return towards, we haven't done it for over a century since William Randolph Hearst needed to protect his timber interests, but industrial hemp. It can grow pretty much anywhere in the country. It requires 11.5 inches of rain for the fiber-rich hemp strains and 16 inches for the oil-rich hemp strains. But it's pretty much just the desert Southwest won't be able to grow it effectively, but New England will especially. Each acre generates about 1.7 tons of fiber, which can be turned into textiles or paper, so appropriately in a textile history museum. If we never moved away from
Unfortunately, the museum is now defunct, but
you know, if we never moved away from hemp, instead of it being a defunct museum, it very well could still be an active mill. Also, you get 55 gallons of oil from the oil-rich strains, which can be turned into biodegradable plastics. So plastic bottles, bumpers, stuff like that, instead of floating around the oceans for thousands of years and killing aquatic life, will just degrade back into dirt and soil and be reusable. Or biodiesel or home heating oil, which, because of the sequestration of carbon in the stalks and in the leaves and in the flower of the hemp.
Okay, I think we can get away from hemp, just in all due respect, and maybe just get back to some specifics. So wrap up your introductory, and then we'll go on to some questions.
Economic development, energy independence, green energy, and green tech. I think those are fields that are going to be taking off in the not too distant future.
Tell us about, Keith, your business. You have a sock company.
Compression sock company, yeah.
A compression sock, so tell us about that.
I was working in finance back in 2014, 2015, and I had a friend from grad school in Portugal, and they had their financial collapse a number of years after we had ours. Kind of started here, rippled around, and some of the banks there were selling discounted bonds, and so professor friend of mine and I went over to meet with my other friend and say, well, what can we do? What investment opportunities are there here? And he was talking about a cousin's mother, or an aunt of his, just had breast cancer and had lymphedema, which is a painful swelling condition. And there was this little factory up north in Portugal, which is about the size of New Jersey. So, you know, we were in Lisbon, it's like a 3-hour drive. It'd be like less than driving from here to New York. So I was like, well, how often am I going to be here? Let's go up and stop in Porto, get some good wine. And met the owner of the company. It's a great little factory. It's been around since the 1920s, survived the dictatorship in Portugal. These great socks that, unlike most compression socks, which are canvasy, are nice and light, and they can really stretch and bend, and they're easier to put on. And so I was talking to him, he said, well, don't make any decisions now. We'll give you the flight socks, fly back to Boston. If you like them, we'll do something. If not, no hard feelings. And it's like a 5-hour flight, got off, no swelling, no pain, ran off the plane, got into the front line for customs, and I was like, all right, I like these. This is the first time I've been able to do this. Normally my feet balloon a little bit. So we've been doing that since.
What's the name of the company?
The brand name is Ogbo. So you've got Ogbo World, and look at them.
Okay, and do you own the company?
I own Ogbo, yes. If we get successful, potentially someday, I'd love to buy the factory.
And where is Ogbo now located?
Marlboro.
How many people does it employ?
Just me.
Okay, so is it do you manufacture there, or are you?
No, we import, and the long-term plan is, if we were able to take off and become profitable here, was going to be to buy a controlling interest in the company and then open manufacturing.
So the company imports socks that are manufactured in Portugal?
Yes,
correct. Okay. Oh, and the company in Portugal, does it employ a lot of people?
50-something, 54, I think. They have a decent stake in the European market. I love the company. They have CSR before CSR was a thing. Back in the day, they used to provide free breakfast for all their employees, because during the dictatorship there was a food shortage in Portugal. So they said, you can't start your shift until you eat. And they had childcare on site. So the first time I met the owner of the factory, He pointed to a picture, and it was a little, 2 or 3 year old kid in a crib holding onto the railings, and he said, yeah, his mother worked here, he stayed in the child care facility, he just retired a couple of weeks ago. So this guy's entire life cycle was with the factory. So it's a great story.
So the company that you own in Marlboro
Yes.
is an employer,
Yes.
not a manufacturer.
Yes.
Okay, understood. We were talking off camera before we began a little bit about the rules of running for Congress and how you're trying to familiarize yourself with what you've got to do and the deadlines and
what is allowed, what is not allowed.
I would think that at this stage of the game, a candidate for Congress would know precisely what they need to do and by when. Don't take offense at this question. Why aren't you running for a seat, say, in Marlboro, the Marlboro City Council, or something that might be, and again, in all due respect, maybe more attainable for you, as opposed to a seat? Let's face it, I mean, running for Congress is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Did you give that any thought?
A little bit. My background's in economics and finance, and my economics ideas are all macro. So at the city level, it's more micro, and I just didn't think my skill set would mesh very well with the local city governance as far as that's concerned. So I think macro, and I think on a nationwide level.
When Nikki Tsongas announced that she wasn't going to be seeking re-election, and thereby creating the rare open seat, was it a slam dunk for you right away to decide I'm going to run for that?
No, I had a lot of apprehension.
Or were you kind of on the fence?
I was on the fence for a while, and it took my wife to kick me in the butt to finally get on the other side of it. But it's all the same things. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a legal background, so I don't know all the intricacies of campaign law and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Had no idea about the scope or the undertaking, but had some good ideas that I think would benefit the country, and want to see my generation get more of a voice at the table. And if at the end of the day all I do is change somebody else's campaign positions a little bit or get more millennials out and participating and paying attention and care, then that's good.
Good. So let's just stick with your business for a minute. This is a question that we've asked everyone. The president's tax plan that got approved a couple months ago, where do you stand on that?
I don't think we could afford it.
So was it a bad deal?
I think it was a mistaken deal. I wouldn't say it was a bad deal. I don't think it's a bad thing to try to cut taxes for the lower socioeconomic groups, but what they did was eviscerate taxes for the wealthy and give a little bit to lower socioeconomic groups. And if you live in a high tax state like Massachusetts, New York, or California, then you're going to have a wash at the end of the day. And especially now with these new tariffs and all these other things that they're putting into place, which are going to raise the base cost of living. And they just announced that they're going to raise the gas tax from 18 cents a gallon to 25 cents a gallon. So, I mean, if you got a $200 tax savings over the course of a year, and now you're paying 7 cents more a gallon, and you buy 100 gallons of gas a year, which is on the low end, I mean, you're getting pretty close to destroying what tax savings you got.
So if you had been in Congress, would you have voted for it or against it?
I would have voted against it.
Okay.
I mean, right now, although they're saying all these companies that had all this money overseas, now they're going to bring it back. Well, when these companies made the decisions to operate overseas and generate those overseas incomes, they knew what the tax rate was. The tax rate didn't change. They made the bet that someday their lobbyists were going to be able to cut that tax rate so they could bring more money back than they otherwise would have, and they just left money overseas until that happened. And I don't think they should have been rewarded for that. One of the other things that I think we can eliminate a little bit of economic activity that doesn't really add anything to the economy is high-frequency trading. And these companies have a fast computer, a computer algorithm, and close placement to where the internet cable comes in, and they're able to jump into trades just in front of you or I or somebody else. And they make fractions of a cent thousands of times a day, and they end up making tens of millions or billions of dollars a year for doing nothing. If you put like a 95% marginal tax rate on capital gains held less than 1 minute, then you'd either raise a lot of tax revenue or you eliminate a non-productive economic activity. And the whole idea with high frequency trading was you need liquidity in the market. I mean, look what happened in 2008. But the big commercial banks have high frequency type operations within them to provide the liquidity. And since they're doing it and they have their other lines of business that are profitable, if you put a high tax rate on that, they wouldn't like it.
Okay.
They might saber rattle, but they wouldn't stop activity at the end of the day because they need it. These other small companies where it's 2 or 3 guys who wrote an algorithm and have a fast computer, if they went away, that wouldn't harm me.
I'd like to just come back to a couple of other things that the president has done. Several months ago, he sat at a table, much like this one, although probably much larger, with members of Congress, where he tried to barter with them that he would do a deal on the Dreamers if Congress would support the wall. Would you have taken that deal?
No. I don't think the wall's a giant waste of money. It'll be nice to point at and say, hey, look, there's a wall. But I mean, helicopters and infrared cameras and drones more than helicopters probably do a much better job of securing the border at a much
use
lower
technology.
price. Exactly.
Many of your fellow candidates have said this.
Yeah, we're in an era of high tech. We spend a lot of money on technology in the DoD, and so let's use some of it here. As far, the deal that he struck with DACA was, we'll extend the people, 1.8 million people who are already here instead of the 800,000, and we'll cut what he calls chain migration, which is really family reunification, in half, and the visa lottery in half. And so it's going to be a detriment to the long term to the country to help people out who are already here. We definitely need to find something to do for the people who are already here.
Well, what would you propose?
I'd like to see some sort of pathway to citizenship that involves paying back taxes, and they've been living here for a while, not paying taxes, or just paying the state and local taxes and avoiding some other taxes. So if they paid the back taxes, if they had to, some sort of program where for 10 years or whatever they weren't allowed to violate the law or they'd be removed. Breaking up families doesn't seem right to me, just because somebody came here. I mean, they wanted a better life and they wanted it here, and they have energy and drive, and we need that. That the normal rate of replacement of the U.S. population, there's not going to be enough Americans to supply all the jobs. And let's face it, the jobs that the people who come here illegally do, Americans don't want to do. I don't see many people standing in line to get a job scrubbing the toilet. I don't see many people standing in line to get a job picking crops in the field. I read a study that came out of North Carolina, I think it was 2014, where they said they need 12,000 agricultural field workers every year, and they passed a law in North Carolina where if a U.S. citizen applies, they have to be accepted. Of the thousands of people they needed, 112 Americans applied, and of them, only 7 lasted more than 2 weeks or something like that. So we need them, we need the work, and we need it done. Nobody wants to see food prices double. Nobody wants to see food rot in the fields.
On a similar note, we've asked all the candidates about sanctuary cities as well. Keith, how much traveling have you done around the district?
Around the district, a fair amount thus far.
Have you been to Lawrence?
I've been through Lawrence. I've been in Haverhill a lot. I haven't been into Lawrence specifically yet. Tomorrow afternoon, or not tomorrow, today's Thursday, right? Yeah, so Saturday afternoon after the Chelmsford.
Well, Lawrence is a proud immigrant city with a proud history. And the president took a real shot at Lawrence in his comments the other day in Manchester, New Hampshire, where he announced his his plan to fight the opiate epidemic. What was your reaction when you heard him specifically single out Lawrence as being responsible for much of the epidemic in the state of New Hampshire?
I think it shows his ignorance. He's not known for being a great thinker, and he likes to find scapegoats, and Hispanics are a great scapegoat, I guess, for drugs, because there's a lot of drug running that goes through Central America. But to cite a city where it's mostly families who just want to live in peace and have a better life than they had previously. I have some friends who are Dominicans who live in Lawrence, or lived in Lawrence, live somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a big Dominican population.
Yeah.
Dominican and Puerto Rican.
And my father-in-law lived in the DR. He was a professor down there for a couple of years back in the 70s, so it's a lot of fun. And, to say that people are themselves illegal is just plain wrong. I paraphrased the Declaration of Independence and the beginning of the Constitution. I believe that all people are born equal with certain inalienable rights, chief among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that extends to everybody around the globe, not just people who happen to live within the United States. And to say that, they don't get it because they came from somewhere else, and that somehow, mom and dad and 3 kids are contributing to the opioid crisis in New Hampshire it's scapegoating, it's ignorance.
On that topic, how do you feel about sanctuary cities? He believes that obviously the sanctuary cities need to be controlled, and they shouldn't receive the same resources as other cities?
Well, I think that is counterintuitive. A lot of, right now, especially with all the emphasis on non-domestic terrorism, although what happened in Austin was definitely not domestic terrorist activity, we need to work with the immigrant communities, or the recent immigrant communities, to come forward and say, hey, this person's doing something that you might want to know about. They're acquiring nitrates and other possible bomb-making devices. Don't you want to go, you should go investigate this and find out what's going on. If they have to worry that the local police are going to say, well, can I see your social security card? Can I see your papers? Are you legal? Then these people who might have seen something that could be a problem, they're not going to speak up, and we're going to have more problems. I think one of the plots that was foiled in New York City was because a recent immigrant came forward to the police and said, hey, something weird's happening over there. And if you start cracking down on these sanctuary cities and demonizing a large population for a small number of people within them who might be doing something wrong, then it's going to have the opposite impact.
Getting back to economics for a minute,
Sure.
He wants the United States out of the NAFTA deal, which he describes, I forget probably whatever word he used.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I love NAFTA. Free trade brings everybody up, and there's an old platitude, a rising tide lifts all boats. I think before NAFTA went into effect, Mexico imported $80 billion, maybe it was only $68 billion worth of American goods. Now they import $180 billion worth of American goods, and that's all because of NAFTA. So by eliminating NAFTA, they're going to hurt American manufacturers. I know Canada protects some of its timber interests, but so be it. I mean, they have very few economic activity available to them. There's only 30 million Canadians, and if they want to protect their timber, then fine. We have other building materials here. We don't just need to use wood. And we should be working with Canada on a number of things. I know there's a big bridge that crosses the Great Lakes between Detroit and, was it London, Ontario, I think?
I think it's Hamilton.
Hamilton, yeah, exactly. And the Canadians said, we'll pay for it, or we'll pay for the vast majority of it. We'll even hire Americans to build it, because if that bridge falls down, it's a huge driver of trade between the two countries. I mean, cars made in Detroit roll over that bridge into Canada every day. And if the bridge collapses, and it's not like we haven't seen major bridges collapse in metropolitan areas in this country, it's going to be bad for both countries. And Detroit and Michigan are already on the brink as it is, so to put a nail in their knee like that would just be detrimental.
I think I know where you'll be on this issue, but his decision to pull the country out of the Paris Climate Accord.
It's a non-binding resolution. I mean, you were in it and you could violate it all you wanted anyway. It's a PR thing, and he decided to be an idiot about it. I mean, he's playing to his base. Everything he does is for his base and his base only, and there's a whole seemingly operating procedure on the other side of the argument. Well, as long as it annoys people like me, then it must be a good thing, and since it annoys him, then great. And it's not a great governing philosophy, I don't believe. But one of the reasons why I talk about hemp, to get back to that, is hemp sequesters carbon. It eats more carbon in its leaves and puts it into the rest of the plant than if you process it and burn it as biofuel. It releases back, so it'll help fix climate change. Also, it gets us off burning hydrocarbons. And it's a renewable crop every year. So if you're a big proponent of wood pulp paper, I know up where I'm from in New Hampshire, Berlin, Gorham, and Groveton all have paper mills, and some of them are closed, and I think Groveton's barely hanging on. If you had hemp pulp, it's every year. With timber, you have to wait 35 years. So if you are a lumberjack and you cleared a plot of land when you were 18, you might clear that same plot of land 1, possibly 2 more times before you retire. Whereas hemp's everywhere. You can grow it everywhere. It's annual.
Nikki Tsongas, when she was in Congress, hasn't been the kind of flamboyant member of Congress as some others have, but she has, and I say this respectfully, she's crafted and gotten involved in some specific issues where she has had a great impact, including sneakers for the military that are made in Lawrence, body armor for women, sexual assault in the military. Real issues that she's had an impact. She's worked with a Republican congressman from Ohio by the name of Mike Turner. If you were elected to Congress, where do you see yourself, and this is a question that my editor Jim Campanini has asked, where do you see yourself trying trying to get in there and make an impact on a specific issue?
Excuse me. Well, to bring it back to hemp, I know I'm a broken record on hemp again, but it produces three primary things: fiber, food, and fuel. It's agricultural, it's green energy, it's jobs that don't exist. So I think growing up in northern New Hampshire, most people up there are right-leaning or independents, and like genuinely independents. So I've had a lot of different people influencing my life. And so I think I could work with somebody from West Virginia or Montana or one of the Dakotas looking for something to do. Craft a law that says either the National Guard or the military, any of their vehicles that run on diesel need to convert to biodiesel to create the driver towards industrial hemp, and also eliminate some of the ag subsidies that go to big conglomerate farms to grow nothing.
So could we call you the hemp candidate?
Yeah, if you wanted to.
Would you object to that?
No, I've been talking about hemp for decades. I mean, or not, I'm only 33, so not really decades. I think I first found out about it in 2006. So in the last 12 years, I've been like, why don't we do more hemp? Why don't we do more hemp? And finding out about it. Okay.
A couple more questions. I'm going to give the floor to Chris, and Chris Tierney, if he has any questions too. This is a question that we've asked all of the candidates. Seth Moulton, the congressman from a neighboring district, has been very active in seeking candidates for Congress that are in the same mold as he is, sometimes veterans, sometimes young men, and he tried to get someone to run for the minority leader's position against Nancy Pelosi in the last session. That was ultimately unsuccessful. But if you were elected and say the Democrats take back the majority in the House of Representatives, do you see yourself supporting a Nancy Pelosi, or do you see yourself supporting someone like a Seth Moulton, or I forget the guy that he supported?
They were supporting.
Pardon?
It was Keith Ellison that some people were
supporting. That might be. The name is almost here, but do you see are you a Pelosi Democrat, or are you a Seth Moulton kind of Democrat?
I like Nancy Pelosi. She's done a lot of good things. I wouldn't want to see her return as the Speaker of the House, and it's got nothing to do with what she did a lot of great things when she was the Speaker. Maybe they could have focused less on bipartisanship and more on getting stuff done for the 2 years that they had control there. But one of the reasons I'm getting involved is, quite frankly, the baby boomers had their day in the sun. They inherited the world's greatest infrastructure, let it fall apart. They inherited the world's greatest educational system, let it fall apart. They inherited a lot of the world's greatest economy, and it fell apart, came back and fell apart. Then they just eviscerated the banking industry and turned it into this too big to fail behemoth that we have today that's only gotten bigger since 2008. And now they're even gutting what little regulation Dodd-Frank put in place. So I'd like to see somebody younger. It's nothing, I think she did a fine job. It's nothing against, exactly. One of the reasons I'm running is, I've heard a lot of people my age talk about, well, nobody looks like me, thinks like me, acts like me. It's all these old people that don't care about me, and so I don't care. I'm paying attention to politics because this just, I don't relate to them. So that's one of the reasons I've gotten involved, is just maybe they can relate to me a little bit better than they could a Nancy Pelosi. But I think it's time to see a youth movement. I think it's a generational change that needs to start happening.
One last question from me, and then we'll move on to a couple of other topics. How do you feel on the minimum wage? Is it time for a universal minimum wage that's higher than what it is now?
This is where the Democrat brain and the economist brain kind of fight with each other a little bit. The minimum wage is abysmally low. The federal minimum wage is kind of a joke. Saw a statistic that said, based on the average union manufacturers' wages in the mid-70s, a minimum wage worker or a floor worker or something of that nature would have to make $33 an hour to be keeping pace with what people in such jobs made in the 70s. Right now it's, what, $7.25 or something like that. So the minimum wage does need to come up, but I think there needs to be a regionally indexed minimum wage. I think a livable wage in Lowell is $17.50 an hour. Where I grew up in New Hampshire, the minimum, livable wage would be like $10, $12 an hour, some, like $10.50, $11 an hour, somewhere in that neighborhood. So to say everybody, the minimum wage has to be $15 an hour. If you're in Boston or Lowell or Worcester or somewhere like that, that's not quite going to be enough. maybe instead of working 3 jobs, you only have to work 2. But it's still not going to quite be there. But if you're in an area where I grew up, the small businesses that have 1 or 2 employees and are barely floating along at the current minimum wage, if they have to give that big of a raise, it's going to be detrimental. So in areas that are already suffering economically, to lose what few jobs there are because of something that's enforced that's above the standard of living in the area anyway, I don't think would work very well. I mean, we have the technology, we have the computing power and the ability, and we have regional Federal Reserve banks for a reason, so we can kind of look at the different regions and say, this is how it's going here, this is how it's going there. So if we had an indexed minimum wage where in certain areas it was higher, in certain areas it was lower, then I think that would be better on the macro.
Sounds good. All right, I'm going to cede the floor to my colleague, Chris Lazinski. Chris Tierney, if you have any questions.
Could you talk a little bit about your views on healthcare? I can't remember at the Hudson Forum if this question came to you.
I was not posed with a healthcare question at the Hudson Forum. So
sure. So what's your vision on
now's your opportunity?
What kind of a healthcare system do you think we should be operating? Are you in favor of a single-payer system?
I think we should move towards a single payer, and there's a number of ways of achieving that. A lot of people just want to try to flip a switch or Medicare for all. It's too big of an industry. Healthcare is, 20% of the U.S. economy, or some ungodly high number like that. There's a few things that we can do to bring that cost down. One, allow Medicaid and Medicare to negotiate with the prescription drug companies to get those prices down to a reasonable level. I think if we were to work with the tax code and impose caps on companies that are involved with the public health, I think that would be helpful. Something like, the highest paid employee can only make 25 times more than the lowest paid employee, and excess profits will be taxed at an incredibly high rate. I just think we need to take the profit motive out of the healthcare industry. The amount of economic loss that happens in this country every year because somebody who was getting sick but didn't have health insurance or didn't have time to take off work to take care of it while they were getting sick, and then all of a sudden catastrophically sick. And we were in the emergency room for 19 hours because, the emergencies go in front. If somebody got shot or stabbed, they go in front. If somebody was ODing, they go in front. And so, sprained wrist is relatively low priority. It's still 19 hours. Sitting in an emergency room in what had been a fairly prominent American city is it's embarrassing. So I would like to see a move towards single payer, but I think there's a variety of ways of getting there. Change the tax code, allow the medical or the big medical, like Medicaid, to negotiate with the prescription manufacturers to bring those costs down. One of the other problems is medical school is so expensive. One of the justifications that they have for why doctors need to be paid so much money afterwards is because they need to pay off their massive student loans. Well, why don't we do something about the cost of the schooling? If we bring down the cost of schooling, that excuse goes away. I had knee surgery when I was 16. Just, skiing in northern New Hampshire often is perilous. And I was talking to the anesthesiologist before or after, I can't really remember because of the anesthetics. But he would say he still drove an old Honda even though he was making $500,000 a year because his malpractice insurance premium was like $400,000 or $450,000 a year or something like that. So it's, we've developed a society of lawyers suing each other for large amounts of money based on small mistakes or maybe mistakes that shouldn't have happened in the first place. But if we over litigate everything, then expenses get driven up, insurance and premiums and everything get driven up. It's a whole system-wide issue.
I think med school is a really good transition right into higher education. I think a common call on the campaign trails these days is for, at the bare minimum, free community college and perhaps things even beyond that.
We should rephrase that. Community college that students do not pay for. So who pays for it then?
Correct. Yeah. Much better.
The old economic axiom, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
That was pointed out to us one day last week.
Yeah, good clarification there. So what do you think should be done about the ever-increasing costs of higher education in this country? One
of the first things that I wanted to say is when I graduated from grad school, I had $113,000 in student loans.
Where'd you go to grad school?
Bentley, in Waltham. Before I went to grad school, I still had like $79,000 in student loans, so I was behind the 8 ball either way. But so the price needs to come down, and one of the ways that that can happen is student loans need to be renegotiable. If interest rates go down to 2.5% or 3.5% like they've been recently, there's no reason why students should still be paying 6.9, 7.9, and 9.9% on student loans. In bankruptcy, you should be able to restructure your student debts. I know a vogue thing for a while in the 90s was Gen Xers would go to college, declare personal bankruptcy, and be absolved of all their student loans. So the financial industry fought back, and now if you declare bankruptcy, none of your student loans are wiped out. If you're a corporation and you declare bankruptcy, they restructure your debt at some proportion of what the debt was. But if you're an individual who's trying to educate yourself, you don't get that same protection. It doesn't make sense to me. So if you declare bankruptcy, I think you should be able to restructure your student loan, not get rid of it entirely, but maybe 60, 70%. But it all comes back around to the financial industry. Since school has become more expensive, people will need to borrow money to go to school. Only a small proportion of people can afford to pay out of pocket or have their parents pay. Even if college costs half as much as it does now per year, you're still not going to be able to pay for it out of pocket, the majority of the cases. So one of the problems that we had was the school helps you get a student loan, which is originated by a company, some bank somewhere. Mine was Great Lakes. It was just Great Lakes. It was out of Georgia. So you start school, you're 4 years in school, which the company's not going to get paid back. You have a 2-year forbearance after you leave school where the company's not going to get paid back. So they don't start making money until year 6. And then it's 10 or 12 years or whatever to pay it off after that if you're lucky. You don't have to extend it out for 20 years. So they discount the amount of money they'll give you using a basic financial equation called the net present value. So if you need $20,000 to pay your tuition, and the school needs to get $20,000, you don't borrow $20,000. The net present value of that would be like $12,000 or something like that. So the financial institution is not going to lend $20,000. They'll give you $30,000 because that's the net present value on the 20. So that you have to sign a loan for $30,000, the school will get $20,000. And that's just driving up the cost and driving up the cost and driving up the cost.
I guess I just wanted to get those notes down here. I think your background geographically is interesting because you grew up in northern New Hampshire, which is so much more of a rural area. I'm not entirely that familiar with New Hampshire's gun laws off the top of my head, but I know that it's significantly more lax and the guns are a larger part of the culture up there compared to down here. So, you know, in the wake of even more school shootings, we now have louder calls than we've had in several years for gun reform. As someone who is here in Massachusetts now, but probably has a closer connection to that kind of gun culture than most of the other candidates in the race. You know, what do you think gun reform, if any, should look like?
I definitely think there should be gun reform. I like the Massachusetts-style gun laws. I looked into getting a firearm when I was down here, and then we didn't go through with it. But I like you have to have letters of recommendations from people you know who already own guns. I like that you need to interview with the police chief. I think the Massachusetts-style gun laws would be a good national model. I know plenty of people in Massachusetts who have firearms, so it doesn't stop anybody from getting them. It's a minor inconvenience that you have to go through all this, but it's better than giving guns to just anybody for any reason. But growing up in northern New Hampshire, I'd know a fair number of people whose livelihoods or food on the table depended on hunting. You know, a lot of nice restaurants in the city, you can get elk or venison or other kinds of game meats. Well, where do you think those game meats come from? They're game. Somebody has to go find it, hunt it, bring it back, and sell it to the restaurant. And that costs money. So it's somebody's livelihood is based on hunting. And then even, you know, people in the lowest socioeconomic groups up there, it's food. And I'm not going to do anything to take food out of people's mouths because I know people who, if all guns were taken away, wouldn't have eaten. And that's wrong.
Well, I don't think anyone is proposing to take away people's guns.
I've met people, definitely in Cambridge and some other areas, that wouldn't mind seeing guns taken away. Yeah, some people on the very far left, or just making it so nearly impossible
Okay,
to get a firearm.
let's be serious on it. Do you really expect
No,
that's what
I don't expect
this
that to
movement
happen.
is about?
No, I don't.
This movement is about, you know, the act being able to acquire assault rifles.
Yeah, and I don't think you should be able to acquire an assault rifle.
Okay.
I mean, one of the people who's one of the best hunters I know uses a muzzle loader. Anybody who argues for needing a assault-style weapon or a military derivative weapon in order to go hunting needs more time at the range and not to go out into the woods and go hunting. And quite frankly, the serious hunters who are supporting, not changing the gun laws at all, I wouldn't think they'd feel safe being out in the woods with somebody who feels the need to have an assault-style weapon to go hunting. I'd like to see Massachusetts-style gun laws nationwide, and I'd like
just a quick follow-up on guns
Sure,
before we go to
go ahead.
another topic. A candidate for governor in Massachusetts recently proposed outlawing the manufacturing of assault rifles in the state of Massachusetts because they're illegal anyway.
Mm-hmm.
How do you view that?
As long as they're available to buy somewhere, I think the manufacturing can move to what, if Nevada wants to allow, I know they have very, very lax gun laws in Nevada. If Smith & Wesson, who I know has a facility in Springfield, wants to move a division to Nevada, they should feel free to do so. But fewer people are employed in producing assault-style weapons in Massachusetts than are killed by assault-style weapons every year. And so I don't think they should be allowed to keep making them in Massachusetts.
Right, okay. Because they're illegal anyway, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris?
I think I've gone through most of my major questions here, in all honesty.
Okay. Chris Tierney, anything off the top of your head?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to go back to something, and we're wrapping up here soon. Something you said earlier. Now, in all due respect, this speaks to your candidacy. It sounded like you were saying earlier that you don't expect to win this race, but if you were able to trigger a conversation, or perhaps get someone to change their position on something. I think that was pretty profound. I was just hoping that you.
Well, I think that's a slight
elaborate on that.
misrepresentation. I wouldn't have gotten in the race if I didn't expect I had a chance to win.
Okay.
But there are 13 people running. There are people who have very big organizations behind them who are already very well known and have a built-in constituency base. And so my odds are lower, perhaps, but I think I have a chance to convince people to vote for me, and I think I have a chance to win. What I'm saying is, at the end of the day, if all I do is change somebody's idea or position on a couple of different topics, if somebody includes burying the electrical lines in their infrastructure plan who didn't do that previously, or if somebody adopts industrial hemp that didn't previously, or indexed minimum wage as opposed to a flat minimum wage nationwide, then I'd be happy and I'd consider that to be a successful bid. But I wouldn't have taken the time off of my own personal business, and I wouldn't have taken the sacrifice away from family and friends if I didn't think I had a chance to win this.
Okay, all right. Have you said all you want to say about hemp? Because I'm going to start calling you the hemp candidate.
I'm sure there's more that'll come along later, but as of right now, yeah. I think it's a great crop, and I think it'll create thousands of jobs if people seriously dedicate some agricultural space and time and effort to it.
Okay.
But
so for full disclosure, I have to tell you that I have a sock fetish. I have hundreds of pairs of socks, and I always seek out the most comfortable sock. Are you wearing one of yours? Yeah. Put it on the table. Let's see the compression sock.
This is
so that's the sock.
Yeah.
Okay.
We call this one I think.
Imported from your company from Portugal.
Yeah. So the manufacturing is its own company, and then we import from them. It's our brand. We pay for the packaging to be printed up and everything. They just package it for us and ship it across. We pay for shipping. We pay for the import tariff.
Now, if someone wanted to acquire a pair of those socks around, Middlesex County or Greater Boston, where could they get a pair of those socks?
Just online.
It's online.
We haven't been able to get any of the brick and mortars to take a risk on a new compression sock company. I know Under Armour's moved into compression socks, and Copper Fit has moved into compression socks, and those are two fairly massive players. And Nike and Asics and all the other name brand athletic companies have compression zone socks, and so the brick and mortars that are suffering from online retail anyway are less likely to take a risk, or at least in my dealings with them so far have been less likely to take the risk. But ogbowworld.com right now is where you get them, and it's Okay, sounds good. Chris, anything else that come to mind?
No, I think
Chris Tierney, all set? All right. Well, we wish you luck with your saw company, and more importantly, we wish you luck on your run for Congress and getting the 2,000 signatures, right?
2,000
All right.
ballots.
So we want to thank you for coming to the Lowell Sun today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.